very much for coming. It's an exciting time of year, of course, being as a grade 12 student, as a grade 12 parent, and for us as academic advisors. So we're delighted that you could join us this evening and hear about some of what's going to happen over the next 12 months as your students go through this process. Pardon me? Apparently I'm muted. That's rare in my life. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to the Academic Advising and University Counselling team. We have two new people. We had two of our department members retire last year, and so we're delighted to introduce Kate Knight and Timio Calistro. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just as we get going, just reminding you or telling you, if you haven't heard it before, about what the role of the university counselors is, or what we feel our role is. We work with all of your students, or all the students who are in the room individually. We normally often have picked them up in grade 10 as advisees, and are now carrying them through the grade 12 and the application process. So hopefully by now we've gotten to know them and perhaps communicated with you in various ways over the years. And we can work with those students to help make sure that they're on track for whatever it is they hope to do in the next phase as they head off to university or college or whatever's next for them. We are at this time of year making a lot of course changes. We don't generally consult with parents about those course changes at this point in the year, and I just wanted to put that out there so you know. If you are wondering about those course changes and how they're happening or what the thinking is behind them as the students are coming in our office, we sit and we talk with them about what they want to change, why they want to change, and we talk about what the implications are of those changes. So if that's a conversation you'd like to have with the advisor who worked with that student, please just contact us. Our contact information is all, for all of us, is in the PowerPoint. You can, of course, call the school reception. It's also on the university timeline document that was out at the front, which you're welcome to pick up on your way out if you didn't get one on your way in. You'll see our email addresses as well as our phone numbers. Our goal is to work with the students and get to know them well enough to be able to help them figure out what are the options they want to pursue and what do they need to know about those options, and how important the steps are along the way to make sure that they achieve their goals, whatever they are in the post-secondary process. For tonight, what we'd like to do is make sure that everybody has a bit of a baseline of information about some of those big pieces, what it looks like to apply to Canadian universities, what's involved in that, what's the timeline for how that happens, as well as American universities, and then other international schools, particularly in the UK, Australia, Hong Kong, and I think that's it. Those are the three big ones that we talk about. So we're going to give you a bit of an overview of how those different processes work, try and weave into that what the costs are, perhaps some of the funding options that you might want to pursue as a family or the individual students might want to look up online. We have changed our scholarship. Miss Casey, who was our scholarship guru, we would call her, is one of our retired people. So what we've done this year is Miss Knight is going to take on some of the big scholarship pieces. She's going to hold some of the information about those major scholarships that have applications required and sometimes require school nominations. We're also going to put the scholarship information in a central place so that students can access the paper side of it. But we do have extensive resources on Moodle as well as on Naviance, both of which the students are very familiar with. If there are returning students, they'll be very familiar with those sites. And we have lots of links and documents and information on there. And of course, they can come and see any of their academic advisors about what's on Moodle, work through the possibilities, what are the opportunities they want to pursue, and then look at how to make that happen in the course of the next few months. A lot of the scholarship stuff will happen between now and April. The first thing we're going to do before we launch into all of that, Virginia Ronning is here. She's the Director of Counseling and Wellness, and she's just going to speak for a few minutes about the idea of transition from a grade 12 to post-secondary.
Hi everyone, welcome. It gives me great pleasure to have this conversation with you. I am the parent of two SMU graduates. One was 12 years ago, and the other 4 years ago. And so I have sat exactly where you are today, and I do have an understanding for this year being a very exciting year, and lots going on, lots of new learning, lots of growth, lots of opportunity. and a little bit of stress, a little bit of worry. As you know, our kids are most of them very, very high achieving, and some of them put a lot of pressure on their shoulders. So one of the things we talk about and we look at quite frequently is how to help them maintain some balance in their lives. One of the things that is also really important is, I don't know if you're aware, you're probably aware that levels of anxiety are at all-time high and worldwide in youth. And one of the things we can do as parents is to really help nurture our kids' strength, our kids' confidence, their independence. This is the year where they're really launching into adulthood. And so to give them some of our confidence that they are going to be able to do it and they're going to be able to find their way. And so I've got 3 words up here that I'd like you just to keep in mind as I'm talking, and that one of them is about balance, the other one's about resilience, and being able to bounce back when there's been adversity, and of course all-round growth. Years ago, the Conference Board of Canada came up with, through much research, with 3 main areas that are important for our youth to be able to be very successful in the world of work in the 21st century. The first one, of course, is one's intelligence and ability to learn and understand, which is a sort of a given. The second is one's interpersonal skills, their ability to navigate the social world, which is very complex in many ways, and lots of conflicts can arise, so the ability to be able to know how to navigate that. And the third is the ability to know oneself and be able to regulate one's own emotions. And again, I come back to a little bit about the balance piece, is being able to know how we help these guys to be able to know what they can do to get themselves through difficult times. We all know that there is some adversity, and it's good to be able to deal with that as it comes up. So our role as parents, I really see as coaches, being able to coach and nurture and just guide our children, our kids to getting through this year, giving them some room to grow, giving them some room to fall and make mistakes, because that does happen, and we do learn a lot in those times of experience. So the other thing is that we're also here to help pick them up or help support in whatever ways are needed as they go through this year. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I did leave a card that we've created that explains about the social and emotional well-being of our kids, because this is a part of the balance piece, and being balanced in all areas. And if you have any questions, you can see me or anybody else, any of the other counselors. Okay, thank you.
Before we go on to the Canadian, one other 21st century skill that, or perhaps 21st century attribute that students have to have is an online presence. And so one of the things that we started last year and will do again this year is our tech specialist, Maureen Han. She came into all of the GTP classes in the fall. GTP is the grad transition plan class that all grade 12 students are in once per cycle. They meet with their academic advisor or one of the academic advisors in that block, and we work through various pieces of the application process, the research process, and then a few other things. So one of the things that Maureen does is she comes into the class, she talks to the students, I close my eyes a little bit, and she asks the students to change their privacy settings on their social media sites in particular, so that what is visible to the public, and that might be the admissions representatives who perhaps are looking to verify some piece of information, and so they Google the student name, that whatever comes up is going to be positive and is going to reflect positively about that student. She also encourages students to create a LinkedIn account, because that is one of those social media sites that is widely used and is growing in use in various ways, both for professional reasons within the world of work, but also even at the post-secondary level as a student in a class who might have a LinkedIn site that has a group within the LinkedIn site. They have a group for that class. So we're looking to try and help students figure out how to manage that social media presence online, and how to make sure that what is visible about them is going to reflect well upon them, and going to be successful or help them in their process. As we go through the evening, if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them as we go along. We will save some time at the end for some general question and answer, and we'll also, of course, we'll be standing around for a few minutes afterwards and can answer questions as we go. So applying a university in Canada. A lot of the students have already done a lot of research or have talked to friends, have talked to family members, have been perhaps even on some of the campuses that they might be interested in, or just on any university campus in Canada to try and figure out, is this the right place for me? What are the pieces that I would need to know about it? The Canadian University Fair is one that a lot of our grade 11 students will have attended, and that's the big fair in the gym. There's usually 30 to 35 Canadian universities that come, set up booths, and students mill around and ask questions of the universities about admission requirements, costs, different program specialties, anything that comes to mind, they can ask those questions. This year, that event is on September 29th. It's a little earlier than in years past. It's a Monday evening, and parents are welcome to come. We encourage the students to come. It's a great time to pick up the preview books. That's what they call those promotional materials, just for first-year students. And we encourage you to come if you're available. So the university applications for Canada are really simple. Unlike some of the processes you're going to hear about the US and the UK, in general, when you're applying to university in Canada, it's a pretty simple application. It's usually demographic information, your name, your birth date, your address. It's indicating what your program choice is, sometimes a first and a second choice. And it's indicating things like whether you are looking to apply for residence, maybe sometimes if you're going to need want to be applying for a bursary or for a scholarship. The application itself is generally fairly simple. They typically run $60 to $120 per university, though that depends. There's quite a wide variety of costs depending on where you're applying and the system that you're using. If you apply to the Ontario University system, I will be upfront with you and let you know that the Ontario University has a central application system. They assess a fee for the application, and then there's fees assessed by the universities themselves. So sometimes parents and students are surprised when they pick 3 or 4 choices at a university, and the application fee for those 3 or 4 choices ends up being over $500 to apply to 3 or 4 different programs or different universities, rather. Individual universities will be slightly, lower on the lower end of that $60 to $120 usually. So just to put that bug in your ear in case you're wondering. There are many universities now that are starting to require some kind of supplemental information. So, for example, at UBC and at a university, St. Francis Xavier, which is in Nova Scotia, every student that applies has to fill out a supplementary application at the time of application. So in addition to that demographic info, they're asking students to answer questions about leadership, about service, about experiences that they've had, and try and help convince the university why they're a good fit for going. Other universities, Queen's, Waterloo, Western, University of Toronto, they have the supplementary piece requirement, but that will be after the time of application. So if they submit their applications in the fall by December, which is what we generally would ask students to do, that supplementary piece is actually not done until January or February. So if a student is just applying to Canadian universities, it might seem like they don't have very much to do in the fall in terms of the application side of it, and that may actually be very accurate. It may simply be just filling out the form, making sure that they've got their birthday right, their PIN number, their personal education number, and asking for a credit card so that they can submit the app. Once the application is in, the Canadian universities typically base their decisions on transcripts. So they're looking to see if they have a supplementary information that they've had to provide, then those universities are looking at that supplement and using that in conjunction with the transcript that they're going to see. So for Ontario universities only, we send transcripts after Term 1 marks are available. So Term 1 marks come out in November, mid-November this year. So we'll use those marks. We'll send a transcript just to Ontario, universities in Ontario, because those are the ones that will accept transcripts at this time of year. And they'll take a first glance at students. If students are not admissible because their marks aren't quite high enough, and those targets are generally higher earlier in the year at the universities, so they might say you need to have 86% to get into arts in December. By the time they look at the next round of students in March, that target, that 86 might have turned into 84. And then by the time they look at them in May, sometimes that 84 is turned into 82. So it sometimes gets a little easier to see what the market is and how many students they're going to actually enroll from those early admission pieces. So we will send those transcripts in December. Some universities do what's called self-reporting, and that's where it's up to the student to report their own marks. what universities have found is that students, by and large, are a very honest group, and they report their marks very, very accurately. So there have been very few issues with that along the way. But it is up to the student to get their Term 1 marks. If there's a self-reporting available in January, they go on to the portal for the university they've applied to that does self-reporting. McGill is one, for example, that does this. And they actually input their own marks themselves. And we have nothing to do with the process. We don't send transcripts. We don't support it. They ask us to stay away. They don't want paper. They don't want anything. They want the students to self-report the marks. What they wait for is then what happens on our end, which is we submit our marks, the February marks, to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education sends those marks to the universities in May. And the universities then look to see a correlation that there's some that the marks are pretty similar. The marks the student has self-reported and the marks the Ministry of Education has reported on behalf of us, the school. And that's all done electronically. The non-Canadian universities that do not self-report mostly want what they call interim marks. So interim marks in the Canadian world are marks that are Term 2 marks. They're sort of the midway through the year marks. So those are marks that are available in February. So if the school is not a self-reporting school and is not an Ontario school, we would normally wait, and we will send transcripts after those February marks are available. So in terms of the timelines, those first term marks are important, the second term marks are important, and the third term marks are important because every offer that a student might get at a university is conditional. So students who are admitted to university, it's always a conditional offer within a Canadian system, or almost always. They're looking to see that at the end of the day, when those final marks are in July, the provincial exam results are done. If you've taken an English provincial in June, the final marks are in. They're still looking to see, do you meet the minimum academic average that we require for this program at this university? And some universities do rescind offers. They do take them away in the summer. That is rare, but it does happen. So I just want to make sure that all the students are aware of that, so that as you're going through the year, that you don't let up in February or March because you think, oh, Ms. McCallum sent my marks, I don't need to worry about this anymore. They're still looking. They're going to look again in July, and they're going to want to see that you have maintained the academic average that more or less that you were admitted with. Okay, that's a lot of information about Canadian schools and their process. Are there any questions that you want answered right now? I've stunned you into silence. Okay. As it says up there, there are a few universities that will consider grade 11 marks for sure. There are a couple of universities that also look at them when there's not a grade 12 mark that they can see. So sometimes McGill and UBC will do that. If the student hasn't submitted a grade 12 mark for some reason, but they can see a math, if they need a math 12, but they can see a math 11 mark, the university will sometimes look at that math 11 mark. Most of the time, this is not a problem because we are a linear school, so students are completing courses in a linear fashion. Any student who's taking a distance education course, though, may be looking to complete one of those subjects that is required for their admission. They need to make sure they're speaking with their university counselor about that so they know exactly what the timeline is for completing it. Because that's where students sometimes can get caught up, is if they don't have the course finished in the time that the university wants it finished. And the universities do look a little differently just at the reporting of the distance ed courses. So that's one that I would just put out there in case you have students or you're taking a distance ed course. The grade 11 marks also, there are a few universities that have had traditionally an early application process. So UVic's one that has had an early application. Some of the East Coast schools, smaller East Coast schools, like Acadia or St. FX or Bishops, Mount Allison, will look at your grade 11 marks and make a decision based on your grade 11 marks and make a really early offer of admission to you, even as early as October or November. And that will be entirely based on your grade 11 marks. So for some students who were very strong students in grade 11 and it looks like they're going to be strong students again in grade 12 and they know that it's a school they want to go to can be to their advantage to apply early and get an early offer. And it just, there's the bird in the hand, and they feel very secure about that, and it's a great feeling when you get that offer of admission. So that's how the grade 11 marks. For the rest of it, your admission decision is very often simply calculated on the average of your best 4 grade 12 subjects, including English 12. So you'll have 3 other academic subjects. No matter when you took them, they're grade 12 level subjects or AP level subjects. Those are the subjects that the universities are going to look at and calculate an admission average on. And they'll use that average to determine whether you're admissible or not. They'll also use that average to determine scholarship. So for entrance scholarships, there's 3 different kinds of scholarships within the Canadian system that universities offer. Those are entrance scholarships and major scholarships. Then there's bursaries, which are separate. So entrance scholarships is money that the university gives you. You don't have to pay it back, and you don't usually have to apply separately for it. So when you submit your application, they calculate an admission average, that English plus your best 3 academic subjects. Those academic subjects will vary depending on the program that you're applying to. But that admission average decides whether you're into the university, and very often decides what your entrance scholarship is. So they'll have a band. Let's say if you have an admission average between 95 and 100%, for example, at Lakehead University, if you have an average over 95%, they will give you free tuition. Other universities will say if you have an average between 90 and 94, you would get maybe $2,000 or $2,500 towards your first year. So entrance scholarships are automatic. There's no extra application. It just happens. You get that as part of your offer of admission. Major scholarships are also awarded by Canadian universities, and those are ones that there is a separate application for. Sometimes we are limited as a school as to how many students we can put forward for a major scholarship. But very often it's up to the students to self-select and decide if they meet the general criteria for what those scholarships are. Those scholarships are typically awarded on a combination of factors, academics being one of them, but also for other reasons, whether that's involvement in school life, in athletics, in fine arts, leadership, service, and sometimes for very specific pieces of work or for very specific programs that a student might be applying to at the university. So scholarships is a great way for students who would like to be rewarded for all their efforts in their high school years. And if they're willing to put the time into those major scholarships, then some of them can pay off pretty handsomely in terms of the amount of funding that they can come away with. Some of which, the major scholarships, is very often renewable. So if the student maintains their academic average in their first year, they'll continue to get that money in their second, third, and fourth year and help towards fund their education as they go through it. Bursaries are, in Canada, what we call a bursary is entirely based on financial need. So the application usually goes into the university. The parents would normally need to provide some financial documentation, T4s or sometimes letters to explain the circumstances and forms to fill out. And that decision is usually simply based on financial need. That's also money that you don't need to pay back. The university offers a bursary to students to support them, to enable them who might otherwise not be able to attend the university. Loans, of course, is another option that students and families sometimes choose to pursue. That is all entirely funded, other than emergency loans. They're mostly funded by the provincial and the federal government. And if you just Google Canada Student Loan or BC Student Loan, you'll find all the information out online and the paperwork that goes along with it. The loan application is late. It's it would be next June for the following September, just so you know. The other option are the private scholarships. So there are organizations that offer scholarships to students, to deserving students for various things, and that could be athletics, it could be academics, it could be fine art, it could be a distinction in a certain area, a non-academic area. We've had students win all kinds of money for all kinds of things that they do, and sometimes they're hobbies that they might even pursue in their spare time. There's lots of resources online about that. There are resources available that we've collected on Naviance and Moodle, as I mentioned at the beginning. There's also websites like studentawards.com, financial or websites in the United States that if you're looking particularly at US, which I think Kate will talk a little bit about, US scholarship websites. So there's a lot of those resources because information changes and there's literally thousands of them out there. It's a great idea to start doing a little digging online and then also check in with your academic advisor about what some of the options are that you might want to pursue. Okay, so that's my spiel about Canadian universities. Do you have any questions before I pass it off? We're going to talk about US universities next. Yes, sir.
The focus has been entirely on marks here, levels of marks. What's the value of AP then, assuming it's more difficult to get marks?
So, great question. The value of AP it can be the mark. So in some cases, students, In a course like an AP Science course, students are actually usually receive 2 marks. A provincial mark, so a mark that's English, might be something like Physics 12, and they receive an AP mark, a percentage mark for the course. Sometimes those marks are the same. Sometimes the provincial mark is a little higher because they might have actually done more challenging work and done well in that, and therefore the corresponding provincial mark is sometimes a little higher. So sometimes there's a benefit there because a student they'll get 2 marks for having sat in one class. This universities will look at AP courses as all AP courses as academic courses. So if a student chooses to take AP Studio Art, that is considered an academic course. Whereas if they choose to take Art Foundations 12, that would not be considered an academic course. So sometimes it allows them the flexibility to do something they really like, but also perhaps use it as an academic course. The other value with AP is when they're at university, if they've received a 4 or a 5, that's generally how it works with Canadian universities, a 4 or a 5 in the course, they can apply for advanced standing. So they can earn credit at the university in that area. So it may exempt them from having to take first-year physics, for example, or a first-year geography course if they've taken AP Human Geography, or a first-year history course. So that gives them some credits in the bank. As parents, you don't have to pay for those credits. You pay for the AP course here, but you then, hopefully, the students are using that course credit, and it reduces the number of credits they need to take at university. So financially, that sometimes is something that parents are interested to learn once they get there. And for students, sometimes for some students, it might mean that they can reduce their course load, especially in their first year, so that instead of taking 10 courses in the first year, they might only take 8, because they know they already have 2 credits in the bank from the courses that they've taken. Anderson.
Canadian universities, for example, like on English 12, do they 100% focus on the interim provincial exam marks, or they do focus their emphasis on both marks, but more on the provincial marks?
So with English 12, they're going to look at your English 12 mark, whatever it is. So if you submit it in February, what we call the interim mark, they will look at that. They'll make a decision using that. If your final English 12 mark is quite a bit lower than the mark they used at the interim, they will recalculate your average. So that's the trick with the English, is that students need to be aware of, is that they do recalculate your average, and sometimes it can go a little wrong. Some of the emails I receive over the summer are it's hard for students because then they're scrambling to make other plans. Any other questions about the Canadian system? Okay, I'll pass it over to Ms. Knight, who will talk about US.
So I've only been here in Victoria for literally about a week and a half. I drove across Canada this summer and moved here from Toronto. So I'm pleasantly surprised by the wonderful weather here. For anyone who's from Ontario, you'll know what that means. And it's really great to be here at SMU. I mean, I've had a very, very warm welcome. So I hope that for those of you who are my advisees, please come by and visit me and say hello. And for those of you that aren't, hopefully I'll get to know you around the campus. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about US colleges and universities. It's a little bit of a different animal, for sure, when you're applying to schools in the States. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but there certainly is a lot of information to know. And so I encourage you as a parent or as a student to please come and see us if you're applying to US colleges, and let us help you through that process. So one of the great things in the States is that they have something called the Common Application, or as we call it, the Common App. And the great thing about that is similar to what's done in Ontario, where there's a centralized system that you can apply to. It allows you to submit your information once and to have multiple colleges and universities across the US be able to access it. So it saves them time, it saves you time, and because the process is a little bit more onerous for US schools, it's a great system to have. For most colleges and universities in the US, the application is a little bit more substantial than what you would need to do in Canada. Of course, you have an application form, but the majority of them do require you to have not just a personal statement, but actually a personal essay. There may be supplementary applications depending on the program that you're applying to or the school that you're applying to. There's definitely an application fee. And for the majority of schools, there will also be standardized testing, so SAT or ACT testing and scores that you would need to submit. So you can see just even from the list here, in comparison to what Ms. McCallum was talking about, it is a little bit more than just submitting an application and at some point in time submitting a transcript. So it's one of the reasons why we encourage you to come in and see us. Let us get that checklist going, let us get you started and get you started on a timeline so that you're not scrambling at the last minute to put together a personal essay that really is going to weigh heavily in that admission process. So you want some time to think about it, kind of roll it around in your head, edit it, have some people take a look at it. For many colleges that a student might apply to, these are the things that the school is going to be able to submit on your behalf. So a transcript with the first term marks, all right, so those November marks that we're able to submit in December. And then as part of that common application form, there's something called the school report, and then of course teacher references and letters. So again, needing to submit these types of items like a teacher reference form, you need to give your teachers some time to complete them. So having been one of those teachers that received a request on November 30th for a letter that was absolutely due on December 1st, that's a little bit challenging. It's hard for me, or any of your teachers to be able to do a really good job and really be thoughtful about what we're going to say about you to help recommend you for the process. That makes it stressful for you and stressful for us and stressful for your parents. So to reduce that, again, that's why we want to get you started on these things nice and early, and why essentially we're hoping to have all of your information in and ready to go by the 1st of December. Even though that might not be the last possible deadline to apply to school, it gives us a chance to be able to review materials and help you and double check that checklist to make sure that you have everything that you need. So being able to plan ahead, knowing what's expected of you, and being able to access resources is really key for you and for your parents to be able to make sure that you have all the things that you need and that you're putting forward your best application. A rush job at the last minute may not necessarily be your best work. Most US schools will take a very holistic approach. So they are looking at your academics, but one of the reasons that they have asked for all of these supplementary items is because they are taking the opportunity to look at you as an individual. So they do want to know about the activities you've been involved in. They do want to know everything from leadership to service to fine arts to athletics. They want to know about personal challenges and obstacles that you've had to overcome. There is an opportunity to actually individualize your application and to share who you are with the admissions officers. So again, that's a thoughtful process. So it's really important that you take the time to do a good job of that. And then one of the things that I always like to emphasize, and it's not just applicable to US schools, it's for everything, but there are a wide variety of schools. We can all name the schools that we've heard of, but there are many, many schools that you might not even have heard of. And so it does take some time. Many of you, I'm sure, started this research back in grade 11, some in grade 10, some in grade 4. Some of you have been thinking for a long time about where it is that you want to apply. But there are a wide variety of schools, both big and small liberal arts schools, large, science-oriented institutions, but also geography. Just like Canada, the US is a very big place. So for some of you, you've been dreaming of living in Nebraska for the past 2 or 3 years. There are schools there. Don't worry, we can help you find them. Others of you are focused on East Coast, West Coast, because you want to keep in mind that this is a place you're going to go and live. So big city, small town. I remember when I graduated from high school, I thought I wanted to go to a really big university until I ended up on a campus tour of a very, very small university, and I absolutely fell in love. So all of us will emphasize this idea of actually going and getting to campuses and seeing them as much as you can, because not just the campus, but the actual town or city that it's in will help flavor your decision, because this is a place that you're going to continue the growth that you've been going through over the past few years, make new friends, and it's a new community that you're going to become a part of. So this idea of just considering a wide variety of options, and if you think there's a lot of schools in Canada, there are a lot of schools in the United States. And like I said, they take a lot of different forms. So please let us help you with that. Each college will assess its own fee for applications, approximately around $75 US, but it can vary, and it will be paid at the time that the application is submitted. There are also, as in Canada, early decision opportunities. So in November, and you would actually get that notification probably before you go out on winter break. So in early December, you're able to find out, just as Ms. McCallum spoke about for the Canadian universities, if you do have an early admission offer. US schools, many of them will look not just at your grade 12 grades or AP grades. They will look at grade 11. Some will go back as far as 9th grade. You know, they will actually take quite a broad look at your grades. Again, they're taking a holistic approach. So sometimes it's great to have seen vast improvement over the years. And so, you know, it's important, obviously, every year that you're at school to do well. But clearly, you know, if you're doing exceptionally well in your senior year, even if you had a stumble back in that one class in grade 9, they are able to see all of those grades, and some will take a look at more years than others. Regular decision applications are usually due January 1st. So January 1st falls in the middle of the winter break. So emailing your academic advisor on December 30th for a last minute thing that you don't have is a challenge. You know, you're on vacation, we're on vacation. It may be difficult to connect at that time. So that's one of the reasons why we really want you to get that information in and ready to go in early December, so that before we both go off on a holiday break, we feel confident that you're ready and have all the tools that you need so you can press send on those applications, which is your responsibility to submit the paperwork that you need to submit. And you feel comfortable that that's not something that you're going to have to worry about, and there won't be any last minute scramble. Fees in the US can vary significantly. Again, it can be very different than in Canada, depending on your nationality. So if you are an American student who's here at SMU, that's very different than if you are a Canadian student or a student from Mexico or a student from Australia who's here right now. It can depend, for example, as an American student, whether you're going to an in-state school where you're a state resident or whether you're going out of state. It can depend whether you're going to a private college or whether you're going to a publicly funded college. So when we talk about the variety of fees, it can go anywhere from Canadian fees that you would see here, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a year for tuition, up to the tens, multiple tens of thousands of dollars for tuition. And you want to remember that you want to take into account living expenses as well, especially if you are going to be living away from home. So you have rent, you have food, you have books, you have travel expenses to and from. So it might be great if you've grown up in Victoria, lived here all your life, and you're really excited to go to Miami, Florida to go to university, which is pretty much as far away as you could get in North America. But you have to take into account that you might want to see your family every once in a while, and they definitely want to see you. So if you're flying home for Canadian Thanksgiving weekend, that's where you're coming from. So you need to take into account the actual travel expenses where you are. So the fees can vary significantly and can be quite pricey for many of the US schools. So that's something to take into account, not just in planning for financial aid, bursaries, scholarships, etc., but just for your own circumstances and where it is that you think you might like to go to school. Scholarships and access to financial aid also varies depending on your nationality. So there will be financial aid and scholarships that are available only to American students. Just like in Canada, they might only be available to Canadian students. There will be scholarships that are only available to international students. So many of the colleges and universities are looking for diversity on their campuses. So there may be ways in which you, as a student who is a Canadian student, or again, a student from Hong Kong, a student from, from Germany, that there may be particular scholarships that only apply to you. So you can see that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of things to take into account, but you're not in it alone. That's the whole idea at SMU of having the University Counselling Department, is that we want to be able to help you get started, to actually pick a starting point to go from, because the information can seem a little bit overwhelming, to answer questions not just from students but from parents, and just to help you kind of navigate that route. Make a map for yourself so that when you get to the other end and it's this time next year and you are on a university or college campus somewhere, that you're excited about the choice that you made, that you felt like it was an educated choice and an informed choice, and we'd love to help you with that process. And the important part is that we want to make you responsible for it. You want to own it at the end, that these were the choices that that you and your family made. That's it. Any questions about that part? Yes?
So when you're reporting your activities, is it also based on trust, like Canadian universities, or do you have to?
Yeah, I mean, all schools are looking for students of integrity, right? So whatever activities you're listing, they should all be verifiable. I mean, at any point in time, any school could ask you to verify something with a reference. There could be a really unusual activity that you've done that it's not that they don't trust that it's true, but they just want to learn more about it. So everything that you list should not only be something that you've done, but something that can be verified. Yeah. And don't hesitate. This is a good time to boast. You should be proud of the things that you've done. And the schools don't know, right? They don't know unless you tell them about some of the extraordinary accomplishments inside and outside of school. I mean, if you're a master chess player or the most beautiful flautist, you know what I mean? Make sure that you list those things, because not just because it's competitive to get into schools, but because you should be really proud of the hard work that you've done. You know, so it's okay to be proud of what you've done and to list it. This isn't the time to be shy about that.
I've heard that for American universities, like the standardized tests and the academics are obviously very important, but I have also heard that your personal essays and reference letters are one of the most crucial factors for all the American universities to accept you. Is that true?
So when we talk about, that's what we mean by the holistic approach. I mean, they're not looking just at a student that scores well on the SAT and has, you know, a 97% average. They are looking at who you are as a person. So this is not only the chance, as I say, to list the things that make you unique, that distinct, the hard work that you've done, but this is also a chance for teacher recommendations and counselor recommendations to speak to. It's a third-party view of you, right? So it's one thing to have done all these things, but who are you as a person? Are you kind? Do you demonstrate leadership? Do you take initiative? Are you someone who has changed maybe over the past few years at SMU? So the teacher recommendations are very important. The school reports, the counselor reports are really important because it is part of what individualizes it. So all of them are emphasized. So it's important that you emphasize all of them as well. And think about, you know, who are the teachers who know you well, who could really speak to your qualities and what's special about you?
Two questions. Could you explain the strategy around the early decision? And then the second question, what are your thoughts on deferring?
Okay. So, I mean, with early admission, do you mean why would someone want to go through that process? So Ms. McCallum sort of mentioned this idea of, you know, when you use your grade 11 marks and earlier marks, when you use those for an early admission decision, a lot of students find that it builds confidence, right? I know that I am meeting the requirements for this particular school that I'm really, you know, excited and really keen to go to. Of course, you have to maintain that. You know, I mean, if you have achieved high results when you're in grade 11, and then all of a sudden all of that drops down in grade 12, then obviously the early admission decision has kind of backfired a little bit. But this idea of being able to know earlier on, to be able to have the opportunity to build some of that confidence early on, you know, it can just kind of give you personally an edge. It also gives the school the chance to see some top candidates early on, and they're making first round, you know, sort of early admission offers there. So there isn't really a downside to it, but it's certainly not required. Just because you don't apply for early admission doesn't mean that you've blown your chances to be able to get into the school. Some people find that their grade 12 grades are significantly better, you know, than their grade 11 grades. You know, it's unlikely you're going to go from 60% to 90%, but you might go from 85 to 90, and then obviously that can make a difference in admission. So you don't have to go for early admission, but it certainly is a step that those students who feel that they've got a strong profile might want to consider. And then from a deferral perspective, again, it can work a little bit differently, even within Canadian schools and individual American schools. Schools have different policies on deferral. Not just the deferral of acceptance, but the deferral of scholarships and the deferral of residence. So for example, at some schools you may be able to defer your admission offer, but they will not hold your scholarship for you because now they're going to go through a whole other year of candidates. They may not hold a first-year residence place for you. Others will, you know, so that's one of those great individual questions that if your son or daughter has a particular school in mind but is considering deferring, then what we would do is we can actually call, you know, she can call or he can call the school, you know, we can do it together and find out what their policy is on that so that before you make any decisions, again, it's informed. I can sort of put everything in a row, I can line everything up, and I've got a full picture to look at instead of having pieces missing and then being a bit frustrated 6 months later when I find out, oh, I probably should have asked that question 6 months ago. And that's what I mean by the checklist, right? if you allow us to help you to get that checklist ready, then we can help brainstorm some of those questions to ask, because every school is a little bit different.
I think I might have missed this point, but would it make the accommodations choices easier with the early admissions? Like, can you
For residents, you mean?
Yeah, can you apply for?
I'm actually not sure if with early admission you can apply for residents earlier.
I think, yeah, if you
Yeah,
if you're
sorry,
offered
I'll defer that question.
I think for a lot of schools, if you are offered an early spot, they're very keen to secure you, for them to get what they, increase their yield, what they call their yield. So yeah, so very often that comes with the promise of a resident spot. You still have to tick the boxes and pay the fee, the deposit, and a few other things along the way. So it's not a guarantee unless the student does their work on that side. But it very often does mean you get that total bird in the hand.
Yeah, there's lots of little tricky bits at the end. I mean, you get all excited that you got the admission offer, and you don't want to forget to check the box that says, I want to be considered for an entrance scholarship, or this or that,
or residence,
or so don't just kind of throw it all up in the air and say, I'm admitted. This is so exciting. There's still some work that needs to be done.
One more question. Earlier they talked about need aware and need blind. So there's a few universities that where you have to disclose your financial information. So if you had a good, strong student with good, strong marks, but maybe not the best achieving students, and they know that as a Canadian you can afford to pay, does that pay for the education? Does that play in your favor?
I think it's going to depend on the school. I mean, I think that every school is going to have a different set of criteria, a different lens through which they view that. So I'm not sure that I could answer that definitively. I don't know if anybody else, no. But Ms. McCallum made a really good point just about this idea that, even with early admission, but also with regular admission, that, I always like to remind students that you are looking at schools and you're excited for them to take a look at you and select you for their school, but you are also selecting them, They are very excited to get, you guys are high quality students. Any campus would be lucky to have you. So keep that in mind, that it's not just about you trying to find which place, where am I, do I have the best chance of being accepted, which one has the program, but, which is the place that's a good fit for me. You're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you, through the paperwork that you submit. So ask good questions. This is a choice this is a life choice that you're making, so.
I have one last question.
Sure.
Because American University puts a lot more emphasis on students who take a lot of challenging APs rather than students who take normal classes.
So what it is that with US schools, they are often looking to see if the student has pursued the most rigorous program available to them. So don't make the mistake that means that everybody has to run out and take 8 AP courses because they might be particularly challenging. Again, it's only one element of the application, so there are many different factors they're taking into account. One of the things I always emphasize to students is, for example, there are many schools in Canada that don't offer AP courses or an IB curriculum, which might be considered to be a little bit more rigorous or challenging than the traditional sort of academic load. So it's not as though only students who take AP courses are able to go to schools in the States. So the idea is you want to create a timetable for yourself that challenges you, where you're learning, where you're achieving results that reflect your abilities, and those may include AP courses and they may not. You're also balancing extracurricular and social commitments, and you should be sleeping more than 3 hours a night. We definitely recommend that. So that wellness piece is really important. So yes, they're looking to see that you've taken a rigorous course load, but that rigorous course load could look a little bit different for everybody. So let your academic advisor work through with you what that course load, what the best course load looks like for you.
I have several questions. I may be wrong, maybe I just heard this totally wrong, but is it true that when you early apply to a certain university in the US, you can't early apply to other universities?
I'm going to defer that question.
Okay, so with some, there are 2 different ways of applying early at American universities. There's what's called early action and there's early decision. So with early decision, that's usually a November 1 deadline for the university. And what they're looking for there is that students who are totally committed, they are gung-ho, they know that this is the only school they want to go to, and you can only apply to one school, usually early decision. You sign a binding agreement when you apply that says that if I'm admitted, I will go. I will take back any other applications that I have out there, and that's it, I'm going to that school. So that's an early decision. The universities are looking for a firm commitment at the time of application that if you're admitted, if they say, yes, you can go, and if the financial pieces all work out for the family and for you, that then you are committing to go to that school. So yes, that's the one that says everything else is off the table.
Do you still apply to Canadian ones?
Yes. So American and Canadian systems, they don't talk to each other. Much like all kinds of things in American and Canadian politics, that doesn't happen. So you can apply to Canadian universities still. However, I would really encourage you that if you're looking, that you only use that early decision application if you're really sure that you will go if you're made the offer. You can still apply to Canadian universities. You could change your mind. We wouldn't recommend it. It creates problems for you for this. If you decide later you want to go to that university and you apply there again, and they say, yeah, but you committed to coming an early decision, and then you decided not to. It just is, it gets a bit messy. By December 15th. Early decision applications, you'll know from the university if you've been admitted or not. Sometimes if you're admitted, they'll let you know by December 15th. They'll either that you're admitted, sometimes they'll let you know that you're denied, and other times they'll let you know that you're deferred, which means they're going to consider you in the regular application pool, and they'll let you know by April 1.
So if I apply to the very early decision one, I can't apply to any other ones?
You can apply, but if you're admitted, you got to take those applications back. Yeah. Early action is another possibility, and that is what they call non-binding. So you can apply early. You're saying, this is a school for me, I want to go. But if you get that offer of admission, you do not have to take it. They're going to let you know by December 15th. They have all their fingers crossed that those early action students are ones that are going to turn around and say, yes, I'm going to come. But they don't have the same commitment that early decision does.
And my other question is, so how heavily do they look on the grade 11 marks? Or do they base it more on...
So for early decision, for any early application, there are no grade 12 marks that go with it. All that goes is whatever you've completed at the end of your grade 11 year. So if you happen to have completed AP courses or grade 12 courses, they'll see them, of course. But with early applications, because they're due November 1st, there are no grades to show them at that time. No, they don't get them. All they want is what are final marks for you. So anything that's completed and on your transcript by the end of your grade 11 year.
Yes.
How does it work if you're looking at sports, going to the States to play sports? So you've got 4 or 5 places that are interested, but no one's committed yet. Do you just apply to each of those ones, or how does that work?
So I believe we actually have a different person.
We do.
Who takes care of the athletic scholarship.
Nikki Kaufman is our athletic counselor, we call her, and she'll be a great resource to be able to answer that question and help you navigate that with the academic. So just get in touch with your academic advisor, and we'll put you in touch with Nikki. Yeah.
Well, excellent questions. I'm going to pass it along now to Mr. Humphreys, who's going to talk about UK universities, but please come and visit us and think about more great questions.
So now we're down to the hardcore that's willing to take a step off the continent, which is great. Every year, about 10% of our graduate class does this. They go to the UK or the Republic of Ireland or Northern Europe or spots in Asia, the occasional one to Australia, and take an increased adventure. Of course, all of you know that these various countries and destinations have superb educational systems, and that's one of the major reasons for taking this adventure. Another major reason, of course, go ahead. Another major reason is to take advantage of the travel opportunity and the exciting chance to see other cultures, particularly educationally. Parenthetically, I should mention to begin with that when you go, they're doing it. he's just done that. Parenthetically, I should mention that when you go to these other destinations, very often the degree program that you get into is a 3-year program, not a 4-year program. So something that influences people's decision making all the time when they consider the cost, say, for example, of Australia or the UK, is the fact that they feel they'll be paying out a lot of money over a period of years, and of course you would, but it's usually 3 years, not 4. So right then and there, you have quite a price differential that starts to work in the budgeting system. But the budgeting system is very important. The UK is our primary destination. We have a steady flow of students going to the UK every year. Probably about 25 students apply. Of those, most get accepted, and a half a dozen or so end up going to the UK. Scotland is a favorite destination. The medical schools in Scotland and in England are favorite destinations, and so are the business programs at places like the London School of Economics. The whole UCAS system, University and College Admission System for the UK applications is actually quite simple. We work an online system. As you can see, the application fee for your group of universities you apply to is about £23. That's what it was last year, roughly $40. And you can apply to 4 medical schools or 5 universities that are not medical programs for that one price. We help the students do the preparatory work. There's a very simple demographic section. There's a relatively simple enter your marks section, and they want all the marks from grade 9 onwards. You can, as a student, enter your AP scores and your SAT scores, although the UCAS system will not require that. They would be impressed by those scores if they're good scores, so students do that. One must write a very important, all-encompassing personal statement, and this, we're told many times by UK admissions officers, is the key decision maker. Pretty well all of our students who apply to UK universities have very good marks. The transcript looks great. If there are AP scores, they look great. If there are SAT scores, they look great. And the deciding factor very often is that personal statement. Students who are focusing on the UK systems must understand that their peer group in the UK, their competitors, have been streamed in their high school system through their A-level system of examinations and have been in immersion study in their particular area. Say it was chemistry. For the 2 years prior to the entry to a university, those students in the UK have been doing a lot of science, a lot of chemistry. There's no guarantee of that in our system. It might be true, but it might not. So what the UK system wants to see is evidence that you have been concentrating on your area of study and that you've been taking the chance to do extra work in whatever it is you're interested in. Stick with the chemistry. So you go to science displays or science exposés, you read science journals, you're involved in anything you can get involved in. That is science-oriented, particularly chemistry, if it's chemistry you want to read, as they say in the UK. So it's very important to show in that all-encompassing personal statement that you are really concentrated on your area of study and the things that are interesting to you. Once the student completes the personal statement and the marks entry and the demographic things, we collect from the teachers a set of predicted marks for those students. And this is an unusual situation. We're trying to collect the teacher's impressions of what the student will end up with at the end of the year. And then one teacher, and we're allowed one teacher only, it's not a counselor, it's a teacher, writes a reference letter. All these things go together electronically in the UCAS account, and then we send that off. The method of sending it is that the student pays the fee and sends it to me, or sends it to Timmy, or sends it to Kate or Allison, and then we check it over and we send it. But it's all very automatic and very simple as long as high quality stuff goes into a UK application, you have a pretty good chance of being admitted. Here's some details for you that are kind of important. Oxford and Cambridge are always high on the list for students. That's the Harvard, Yale, Princeton group in the UK. Very fine universities, and we've had students go to both universities, of course. Any medical program, any dental or vet program, those applications are due a little earlier on, specifically October 15. And there would almost always be supplemental testing or supplemental assignments or proof of work submitted for those. So it's very common for students to have to send in essays or do a biomedical admission test for the UK to accompany those applications. For the most part, the other deadline of January 15th, we don't get much worried about that because our students finish everything by the time they leave here December 15th. So all that UK stuff is also done, finished, by the time they leave school in the December term. Tuition, as the figures are written there for you, quite expensive, and the pound is very strong right now compared to the Canadian dollar, so there's no getting around that it's expensive to do this. But remember the 3-year rather than 4-year investment. There are very few sort of lucrative and simple scholarship offers available in the UK. There are some. You have to check them out university by university, program by program, because many universities in the UK put their scholarship money in the hands of their faculties, in the program by program, not a general admission type thing. So you have to check that out very carefully. There's one very lucrative scholarship at Cambridge which we're very excited about and we brag about because one of our students won it a couple of years ago. Basically what amounts to a full ride to Cambridge. But that is very rare. So we might as well get that straight. It's costly. One thing that's somewhat different in the UK, and this is true in Australia as well, is it's not that hard to get student employment. And the money that you're paid for the work you do is better than the Canadian minimum wage. So that can be factored into the budgeting exercise as well. That website gives you a chance to find the course search links. When we say course for the UK, we mean degree program. That's the term they use. So for us, it's a degree. For them, it's a course you're studying. All right. We've been through that little bit already, the top part. Interviews, quite interestingly, some UK universities will now do Skype interviews. In other cases, for example, in Oxford or Cambridge, or even an LSE admission possibility or University College London, we recommend to the students that they go over there if they possibly can and present themselves as positively as they can to the actual admission recruiters. And many of our students have done that in the past, to go right to Oxford for an interview, which is great. Although Oxford does come to Canadian studies, I think they come to Vancouver pretty much every year. It's a nice thing about this application system that they don't have to accept an offer until they've heard back from all the schools they've applied to. But remember, within this application system, you do have a maximum of 5 programs that you can apply to. That could be 5 universities, or it could be 3 universities, 2 of them with 2 programs each. But it's still a 5-program limit. So it makes sure that you've done your research ahead of time to figure out what's appropriate to you. Across the Irish Sea to the beautiful Emerald Isle, you have a different education system with some similarities, but this application system is actually even simpler than the one for Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland. And there are some wonderful universities here, as I'm sure you're aware. You have pictured there at the top, University College Dublin at the bottom, Trinity College Dublin, the very famous library that houses the Book of Kells. Ireland is a wonderful place to study, not just because of the superb, enjoyable people, but also because of a deep academic tradition, which is highly respected the world over. So we do have students applying to Ireland every year. Most often they're applying to the medical schools, And in order to do that from our part of the world, you use the Atlantic Bridge program. Students, your academic advisor can show you that website. It's actually, once again, quite simple. There is a package of materials to create and to send. But once you send those to Atlantic Bridge, if they feel that you're an appropriate candidate, they will then start working with the universities to find you the place. Of course, you will prioritize your places, and hopefully you'll get the one that you want. Ireland is wonderful, just no two ways about it. The costs, relatively the same as the UK, although if you're dealing in more currencies now because they use the euro, a little cheaper. There still are work opportunities for students, but it's perhaps a little harder to find a job you want in Ireland than it is in England. We do have students that apply to Hong Kong universities. Very often it's students who themselves come from Hong Kong. These are wonderful institutes, and there are several in Hong Kong that teach in English, if you want that. The universities are highly respected and give a wide variety of programming. Some of them have 3-year programs, some have 3- and 4-year programs. And you can see the basic facts here. There are scholarships for international students. What you generally will find on the scholarship front is that the international student offerings, whether it's in Canada or the US or UK, wherever, are slightly lesser than they are for domestic students. So international students, whereas they can always apply for scholarships where they're going to, there isn't always that much money or that many opportunities. So it's always necessary to remember that it's somewhat limited, but there still is money there. So they use a BC transcript, and that's fine. They like to have SAT scores if it's possible, and a minimum average of 80%, including the English 12 course. Personal statements, letters of reference, it's all the same kind of general collection of materials. The websites of each university that you're interested in will give you more of the stuff that you need. And there's also usually on those websites, there is a visa application information as well. I should have mentioned that with the UK and Ireland. If you're thinking of the UK in particular, get started on your visa application process as early as you can. It's quite complex. It's fairly dense. It does require a visit to your nearest border services, UK Border Services office, which in our case for here is Vancouver. And you really do have to take your time and make sure that gets done properly.
An acceptance?
You should start the process, but the acceptance cannot be completed until you have your number from your university. So you have to be accepted. They have to send along the number that the border services need. That's when the ball really starts rolling. But you can have done a lot of preparatory work up to that point. Maybe I should pause for a minute and see if there are any questions about the UK, Ireland, or the Hong Kong universities. Thank you.
How long are personal statements?
Personal statements are limited in the UK application to 4,000 characters. So we tell the kids essentially, write a blistering good piece that's about 400 words long, and then we actually, what I do with my students is have them insert it into the thing, and it tells you exactly how many characters you have left. So I'm able to say to them at that point, well, you know, if you really wanted to put those 2 sentences in there about the chemistry experiments you've been doing, you could. Or I might have to say to them, you know what, you're 2 sentences over. We got to cut this down. So it's not very much. And the teacher letter is also limited by the same. So the teacher has to be very succinct. And in fact, the content of what the student writes and what the teacher writes better jive. It better make good sense together. This just doesn't work.
If your kids are applying to the UK and the USA, can the teacher letter be the same letter?
For the most part, no.
No.
What the US letter wants to know is exactly how that student sort of fits into the whole picture of that course or that study. They want to know character elements about the student. It's a wider, more generic letter. In the UK letter, what the admission recruiter wants to know is all the academic stuff. They really don't care a lot in the UK about what they might call the fluff. And they say that rather disparagingly when they compare themselves to the US universities. So we don't want all that American stuff. We want to know exactly what you're doing academically, exactly what your talents are, why they're important, and why we should consider you to study chemistry. Let's stay with the same example, with peers who have been doing this in an immersion fashion for 2 years. Why should we let you into Oxford to study chemistry? In the US, they want to know more about how you'll fit into their overall society of their school. They still need to know that you're very competent as a chemist or a mathematician, but they want to know more. They want peripheral information as well. So generally speaking, I would say no, the two letters are going to be quite different. Doesn't mean the same teacher can't write the letters. It just means that he or she has to know that these are different letters. Our teachers really know what they're doing on this front.
Is it possible for a transfer between British universities and American universities? For example, if I completed the first 2 years at, for example, the University of Cambridge or Imperial College London, right? Like with really good grades or like more high percentages or GPAs in American standard,
Yeah.
can switch to one of the Ivy League schools from the UK university.
In principle, yes, you can transfer from one university to another across international borders, but it's going to be up to the receiving university to credential and evaluate what you have done, say, for example, at Imperial College London, and to say, yes, this works for us for our first 2 years of our chemistry degree at Boston U. Yeah, that'll be okay. And the marks are absolutely superb, so this is somebody we could admit. What you do have to realize is that, in that particular example, Boston U will require you to be on their site for 2 years in order to get their degree. Now, if you'd stayed at Imperial College London, you would only have 1 more year to go, right? Because that's a 3-year degree there. So universities have their own rules about how they confer degrees and what they require of you. But those transfer arrangements are usually possible. You made the really good point, the valid point. It's the most important point. Your marks have to be really good at the university you're leaving in order for the receiving university to think you're a good bet for transfer. And, quite frankly, people have to transfer for all kinds of reasons. Family reasons, other reasons. You have to move country to country. So it's not unheard of. It's not really common either, but it does happen. Yeah. Let's get on. I want to give you folks a chance to breathe again. Finally, Australia. What a wonderful place to go to university. What a wonderful people. Flora and fauna, of course. Everybody knows that Australia is a special place, and it is. I have a special place in my heart for Australia. One of my children went there for university for part of the time. And Australian universities are the whole culture is so welcoming to anybody else from anywhere. And if you go now, say, to the big cities like Melbourne, you find it's a very intercultural place. Multiple nations and multiple languages represented on the streets of Melbourne. Very different from what Melbourne was like, say, 40 years ago. Very different. But Australia has made leaps and bounds in intercultural and global acceptance that the rest of the world could take a lesson from. Bond University is just up the waterway there. This is Gold Coast. And on the right, you see Sydney Harbour. And I don't know who that guy is on the top right, but I think I met him somewhere over there. These universities have a great reputation worldwide. And they have a very simple application system. It's an online application system. They want to know about your marks. They want some letters of reference into that sort of thing as well. But the Australians, are relatively laid back about all the mechanical stuff. Example would be the visa application. Fill it out online, pay your money. 2 weeks later, it's in your hand. As compared to other places where you're working for months to do it. We recommend that you look at Austrec, which is a group that, or Global Links Learning Abroad. Both of these groups work for the Australian government, lubricating business, basically. If you want to apply to Australia and you use one of these services, they help you with everything, right from, you know, the day you land at Sydney Airport to how you get to where you're going, to what your residence will be like, how to deal with the money issues, and so on and so on. They're very helpful. They want you there. The Australian dollar is one of the strongest currencies in the world, so once again, you can look at the numbers and you'll know that it's a costly enterprise to go to school in Australia. But at the same time, there are scholarships. You'd have to look at the websites again, but some of them are quite lucrative for international students, and a tremendous chance for young people to work. Almost all university students are going to end up wanting to have a job at some point. A lot of people from this school, you know, call us back or come and see us and say, yeah, I work in the library 10 hours a week, it's great, and they pay me minimum wage, you know, whatever that is, $9, $10 an hour. Well, if you're doing that kind of work in Australia, or you're working in a restaurant, you're going to get close to $20 an hour for your minimum wage. That's what it's like. My son went out on the street one day with resumes, and a week later he had several job offers. He ended up cleaning tables in a restaurant for $18 an hour. That was what he started at. So that has to go into your budget considerations, as well as the concept that this is a 3-year project in Australia, not a 4-year project. So there are some online resources for you. This, of course, will be on the document that you can access online, and then those are just hyperlinks. And, of course, your great system of advice comes from the academic advisors, who are specially trained as university counselors. Between the 4 of us, we've probably been to, I would say, 200 universities. I know I've been to 110 universities myself in most of these places. We have personal relationships with many of the admissions recruiters. We can walk onto most of these campuses and have a friendly one-to-one conversation about any of these students and introduce them to the university recruiters, and then communicate with them personally about these students. So the connections are great. Can't remember if anybody mentioned it yet, but these universities all come to us as well. Every year we have 100+ universities on this campus, many times in this room, from most of these destinations. And there's nothing that replaces personal contact. So students know, I think they know by the time they get to grade 12 that they've got some advantages in terms of the connections that we make for them and the personal attention they're going to get from these university recruiters. There's one coming next week from Colgate University. His name's Gary Ross. He's been coming here for 15 years. He's the Dean of Admission, and he still knows the name of every student who has applied to Colgate in the last 15 years. And I was there this summer with streams of undergraduates passing through the admissions office. He knows every one of them by name. That's the kind of attention we're looking for, and that's what we try to search out in our university recruiters. And of course, it's exactly the same thing that we try to do as advisors for our students, to give them very, very personalized attention. Now, any questions about the last few things that I talked about?
Where do first-year students usually live in either Australia or the UK? What's common?
It's not what's common in North America. Very often, students live in privately owned apartment blocks around the city. So, for example, right close to the University of Melbourne, there are 6 or 8 privately owned university residence blocks. They're not part of the university property. They do have university residences. Students live there as well. But very often, students simply rent a flat somewhere. Sometimes a flat that can be shared by 4 or 2. Now and again, you get somebody living in a solo.
Does that make the move and the transition a little bit tougher, though, because they're not guaranteed, like, residence?
You know what? I haven't heard that said, but it would be, you know, individual thing. One student at a time would have to know whether that would work for them. And so those students should look for a university, if they're nervous about that, they should look for a university that has built-in university accommodation. And of course, there are hundreds of them everywhere.
What about in the UK? Is that the same?
Much the same situation. I had a daughter who studied in Manchester. She lived in a private residence for a year, and then she moved out and lived in a flat. And the residence was right next to the university. So they have a different view of that. Universities don't have necessarily all the ancillary services right on campus. For example, some UK universities don't have a medical center. You go to the clinic that's 2 blocks this way or 5 blocks that way. Whereas every Canadian university will have its own medical center. Just a different way of, it's the result of being in a more mature society.
How would you apply scholarships to universities if you already had some already?
So if you have some scholarship money waiting for you from various sources, how do you get it to the university office? Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not that hard in general. You're in contact with your financial office at the university because you're starting to pay tuition, and in some cases the situations are relatively automatic. For the BC Awards, for example, if you get the BC scholarships, all you do is send that paperwork to your finance office at the university. They can automatically just stamp it and apply it to your account. Other times you'll need to make slightly more detailed arrangements if you have a private scholarship, but it's all possible if you have good contact with the registrar's office at your university that's receiving you. It's all easy. It all works. But good for you for asking that, because some people don't know that. Anything else, ladies and gents? Right, well, you've been exceptionally patient, unbelievably so, and thank you very much for that. I know it's a long evening, but I think we have an opportunity for you to just mingle around with us, and we have, maybe there's a little bit more tea left out there, I don't know. But thanks so much for coming, and look forward to seeing you all this year.